Welcome, everyone, to episode 4 of the Dolphins Make Me Cry podcast. And thankfully, the preseason has come to an end. Dolphins end at 2-1 with a 24-14 loss in Tampa Bay to the Buccaneers. Very interesting game. Interesting for this reason. The Bucs played their starters to start the game on the first drive, went down 7 plays, scored very easily on essentially a backup Dolphins defense. So, as in all these preseason games, as I've said the last few weeks, it's kind of hard to really gauge. You're not really watching the wins and losses. You're really watching the position battles and kind of seeing who is stepping up. And the reality is when you have first-string players playing second-string players, usually first-string players are gonna win that battle, which they did, kind of starting the game and ultimately overall. A couple of takes from this game as we finally wrap up a preseason that was just, they're just boring. I mean, I love football more than anybody, but just having to kind of endure the games, it's almost like watching practices, to kind of see who's going to kind of emerge, and you hope that there's a couple of glimmers. But then even when you see the glimmers, it's hard to figure out who's really good and who's really bad. So, couple of big takes from the game. We've talked the last few weeks about the QB2 and QB3 battle with Mike White and Skylar Thompson. Both have been underwhelming throughout camp and through the preseason. Mike White, he had a very, very poor performance, and it's a shame because he's a guy that, he had some success with the Jets. The Dolphins signed him last year. He really only had to play essentially in the Denver game last year in mop-up duty, and I probably could have went in there and thrown a touchdown pass in that game, and he threw a big touchdown in that game and kind of finished it out. But, Tua played 17 games to his credit, which is what we all wanted, and Mike White kind of just rode the bench, and now he's, scratching and clawing with Skylar Thompson, who's a guy who's been here now 3 years in the system. You can see some ability and some talent, And again, at the end of the day, the backup QB battles in a lot of these NFL cities, there's only a handful of teams that have a backup where you would say, hey, if they had to come in and win, in 2 to 3 weeks, they could keep you alive and, they could do enough. Some teams have better backups than others. Backup quarterback play, it is what it is. The thing you fear is last year, almost half the teams in the league had to go to a backup at some point. Luckily, we were not one of them, and that obviously was a big reason for the Dolphins' success. But, Mike White did not do himself any favors. He had a very, very poor performance. He did not command the offense. Now, in fairness to him, he had 2 offensive line starters of the 5, and they did not look good whatsoever. So we're going to get to the offensive line, as we're probably going to get to a million times this season during this podcast. He did not look sharp, did not look good. He just, he's not making decisions. He's rushed, and everything is kind of working against him. The offensive line, and then that offensive line leads itself to where the run game can't get any push up the middle. There was one play where Vita Vea, who again a starter, he just basically bulldozed. He bulldozed the center right down, and it was just a crazy play, and just kind of showed you all you needed to know. And I don't want to read into the physicality element that I've talked about with this team and the things that we need to see this year, because again, it's week 3 of preseason, so we want to curtail that. But you could just see from start to finish last night, the Bucs came out, like they needed to win jobs, and the Dolphins, in my opinion, didn't. Certain exceptions, Malik Washington would be one. But, if I'm Mike White, where essentially you're making $3.5 million and you should really have that second QB spot sewn up over a Skylar Thompson, who was a late-round pick, and we're sitting here saying we don't know who essentially probably will be number 2 going into the cut down day on Tuesday. That's not good. In my heart of hearts, I think what'll happen, because of the nature of what Mike McDaniel is and what the culture of the Dolphins is right now, I think he'll ride with his guys, because I don't think I don't want to say he never makes tough decisions on personnel, but I think he's not Mr. I'm going to go cut you tomorrow because of the nature of what he's created. And sometimes I think that's good and bad. I think Mike White will probably end up being your backup, but you could see scenarios where maybe they just feel Skyler is better in certain spots. And again, mute point if Tua plays, but let's face facts. What are the chances of him playing 2 straight years, 17 straight games? I mean, it's tough to do in any scenario. And the worry here is either one of those guys, like the drop off to me is immense. Like there's some other teams, like the Jets are a good example where they have Aaron Rodgers and they go get Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor can win you some games. Tyrod Taylor is a veteran. He's a proven guy in the league. He can make plays. He's not going to light the world on fire, but he could definitely, if I had to go in a couple of games and you told me I'm getting Tyrod Taylor or I'm getting Mike White or Skylar Thompson, I'm signing up for Tyrod Taylor all day long. And to me, as we go into this now, you have a lot of talent on this roster that we're trying to figure out, can we really contend? Can we win this division? Can we win a playoff game? Can we do all the things that we need to do this year to make it an actual success? And we're going to sit here and say we paid Tua, who has concussion history that I think everybody kind of forgets. Guy almost retired. And now we got Skylar Thompson and Mike White as a backup QB with all this talent. Now, again, your backup QB is not going to be Mr. All-American quarterback, but I'm sorry, the drop-off there was huge, and me even talking about this is a mute point because they're not going to go out and do anything about it, and frankly, there's 2 things that work against them. 1, there's not a ton of guys out there right now that you're going to get. 2, and we'll say 3 things that'll work against them. 2 would be to get somebody into the system and acclimated and a fit for the system at this point, like with 2 weeks to go in the season, it's not going to happen. And 3 would be kind of that Ryan Tannehill factor. He doesn't really fit the bill, but I'd make the call. They won't. I know they won't. I'd be shocked if they did. They won't. Now, if they did happen to cut Mike White, which I also would be shocked if they did, you're saving $3.5 million. Not to say that should be a motivation because it shouldn't. You have cap space. It is what it is. They're going to probably let it ride, but I'm worried about if something happens to Tua because if you look at a backup in general, right? Can a backup win you a game? Can a backup keep you 500? Can a backup make some plays? And at the end of the day, shouldn't even say make plays. Can a backup not kill you? Can a backup not make the mistakes? Could you lean on your running game in games that the backup has to play? Can you lean on short passing game and your defense and your good special teams to like kind of grind out a game that you're not going to have Tua throwing, bombs all over the world? I don't look at either of those guys as they can do that. I'm sorry. I don't. Now, again, they're not playing with full complement of the team, Waddle, Hill, Beckham, so on and so forth. But it's a little problematic right now for what it's going to be, and it kind of is what it is. As for the rest of the game, the team, as we get ready and set for cut down day on Tuesday, going from 90-man roster to 53, I'd say the good. Malik Washington had a very good game. You can definitely see flashes where he is a playmaker. From all accounts, his problem is really his hands and his pass catching ability. You could kind of tell last night what they're trying to do is just get the ball in his hands where it's not a matter of, hey, he's got to be a masterful pass catcher all over the field. Special teams is huge, and if I'm them, I am using that dude on special teams all day long, and maybe, hopefully, he can be a secret weapon into the doldrums that they had in special teams last year from a kick return and punt return perspective. And then, you had a reverse with him. He, to his credit, tough kid, went across the middle, went to catch a ball, got knocked out, came back in the game. He's been practicing well outside of just being a sure-handed pass catcher. Probably definitely going to make the team, which leads me to the next thing, which would be the depth of the wide receiver room. So it's interesting. Like, I feel like there's many years of Dolphins, hey, we have all these receivers. And then, next thing you know, like 7 of them are hurt. interestingly enough, like kind of in the same boat. Tyreek hurt his thumb. Not supposed to be a big deal. I'm sure he'll be ready for week 1. Waddle's been battling injuries. He's been held out. He should be ready for week 1. Beckham, they signed him in May. He hasn't went to OTAs. He hasn't went to training camp. He hasn't played in a game. He hasn't caught a pass from Tua. And we're literally 2 weeks away from the season, and we're magically thinking the guy's going to be out there. I'd put money down that he's going to be on the PUP and out for the first 4 weeks, because I don't think, and Tua made a comment, that they're going to put him out there if he hasn't practiced. So that's a mystery. Now, he's wide receiver number 3 in the mix. And the reality is that wide receiver 3 is kind of the backup, in a sense, for Hill and Waddle. Now, you're in trouble if Hill and Waddle get hurt and he's on PUP, number 1. Then number 2 would be Jonnu Smith at tight end, really probably being your third weapon. And probably the reality is there's going to be a lot of packages for Jonnu Smith running the ball through the seam of the defense. And hopefully, in addition to him, you can get these other tight ends in the mix. Tanner Connor, Julian Hill. You can just get that production from that tight end, which is what we talked about last week, which is the missing link of this offensive football team. So you have that from a wide receiver perspective. And receiver-wise, Eric Ezukama comes out last week. The guy, he's been here 2 years, battled injuries, has talent. We can all see it. Plays well last week preseason. Bang. Joined practice this week, gets hurt, misses the game last night. A game that he really probably needed. I'm sure he's going to be in the mix on the roster, but there's another guy, and then River Craycraft now hurt in the preseason game last week. He probably would have been your quote-unquote 3 or 4 sure-handed receiver, solid guy, like him a lot, but the guy he's just missed a ton of time. He missed a ton of time last year, didn't come back till the end of the year. I'm sure he's going to be a PUP situation. So the Dolphins are going to have some very interesting decisions to make on Tuesday as how they're going to formulate the roster, particularly where they're going to put the injured players in the mix, because you can only put so many guys on that 53 that are going to be on the physically unable to perform list, because it's going to hurt you as far as how many roster people you got. I mean, tops, I think maybe 2 guys, probably 1. Then you have practice squad, and then you have putting a lot of these talented guys, they have to go through waivers. So if you go from that 90 to 53, you cut these guys down, they have to go through waivers where every other team has an ability to sign them, and you're certainly going to lose guys there, and then they can go on practice squad. So it's going to be a very tricky scenario for how Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins front office kind of handle the roster. Other things from the game last night, overall, just a physicality and I would say an effort perspective, I didn't see it. I thought the Bucs come out and they're lively. They know that, Todd Bowles said it. We got to get our starters reps. They need to play. They got to get ready to go geeked up for the season, and they were. And you just saw a level of physicality, I think, from the overall team, and I felt the Dolphins just didn't have it. And again, I don't want to read into it. It's week 3, but I'm going to go here on the offensive line. And if you like offensive line talk, you're going to want to listen to me all year long because, and most people don't, most people overlook it, this team is built for speed, and that's great. Nobody's mad about speed. We like speed. We like fast. Speed is good. Speed kills, as they say. The problem I see is the overall depth of this offensive line, particularly in the guard position. And it's almost like they say that part of the football team, I don't want to say it's not important, but it's not as important as maybe I think it is or others think it is, right? Hey, we can get by because we're fast. Well, sure, until somebody and we'll use the example of the Chief playoff game, right? When they bottle up Tyreek Hill and get crazy physical in the cold, right? And they take away the speed, and then you can't actually smash somebody in the mouth and run them over for a 3rd and 1. That's the problem that I have. And I think we're fooling ourselves if we think we're going to see anything different. Now, do I think they're going to try to be that physical 3rd and 1 we line up, we smash you right down your throat and we got a first down? Do I think they're going to try like they did last week in the preseason game that I talked about? I do. Do I think it's going to work? I don't, because you don't have the force in the middle at the guard positions. You also don't have the backs that are going to do that. And personally, I think if we're going to analyze the year right now, right, that could be a huge mistake, in my opinion. Because it's almost like they're saying we didn't learn. And I'm going to now flip it to the defensive side of the ball. And the fact we've talking about losing Christian Wilkins, right? Shouldn't have paid him the money. Was never going to, to pay him that money was just ludicrous. But you're losing your stuffer in the middle. And if anybody wants to look at the reason why their defense was top 10 last year overall, whether all the Fangio talk, oh, he's a dictator, he's a this, he's a that, whatever you all want to say about Fangio, he had a top 10 defense and you stopped the run. Now you've signed about 67 defensive tackles. They have no defensive ends listed on the roster to try. And on top of it, you're going to start the year essentially with probably a limited Jalen Phillips and no Bradley Chubb. And you're gonna rely on Chop Robinson and Kamara to kind of fill a void. 2 rookies. I don't have a crazy amount of confidence that they're going to be able to set the edge and funnel in to now your better linebackers to stop the run. And I think that is going to be huge. It's going to be a huge, huge issue, I think, particularly early on, because those guys being out. That's a problem. The defense went last year because you stuffed the run, and then it opened things up because you have good outside corners and a good secondary. But if you cannot stop the run, it's going to create this domino where those guys in the secondary got to creep up, and then all hell breaks loose. That's a worry for me. Big time worry. A couple of quick things I want to kind of end it with here would be, one, I like the makeup of the team. I like the culture of the team. There's an element here of the Dolphins are soft. If you ask me, I think the Dolphins are soft, personally, right? Watching this team for however many 30-something years I've watched it, seeing good, bad, and ugly. I think this culture they have it sounds really good, but it hasn't translated to, I don't want to say wins because they've won and been in the playoffs, but to big game wins. You hear a lot of just, I don't know, it's a lot of it's almost like they need a dog in the locker room to just come out. And you've heard some stuff about Jalen Ramsey, of things he's saying. It's almost like they know. They need some dog in them. They need this year to be so pissed off at the fact that they have all this talent and they suck against playoff teams. Last year was amazing. It was video game numbers and touchdowns and, all this crazy stuff, right? But I'm not building a team for the video game. I'm building a team to win a championship. And I feel that there's a lot of talk and a lot of chatter around just, we're this culture, we're so good, we're so this, we're so that. There's always talk about, them being disrespected and what this one on ESPN said, and then they address it. Stop already. Be mentally tough enough to not give a shit. Why do I care what Skip Bayless says on fucking ESPN? I don't. Why do I care? But they address everything, and it drives me nuts. And it leads me here. Tua. I like Tua. I'm a Tua fan. He's a good player. I want him to take it to the next level. I think he has a next level, which is great. It's better than me saying he doesn't. But, he's on the Dan Le Batard show. Dan Le Batard, of course, asks a great question, talking to him about the Flores era. He addresses it, not the end of the world, but it just becomes this, hey, he didn't believe in me, and he was hard on me, and he this and he that, and, we all know the stories. He went out and he was looking to get Tom Brady. He was going out to try and get Deshaun Watson, and he was, berating him, and they had a fight in the locker room in Tennessee, and like all these things that you've heard about the relationship. So we're now like 3 years later. We've had a coddle and baby Tua for him to like now be successful, and we're still like talking about it. And again, in fairness, it was in an interview, but like, I'm just so sick and tired of it. Like, you haven't won anything. Like, you haven't won a playoff game in 24 years. 24. Like, I remember the last one. I watched it. 24 years you haven't won a playoff game, right? And Mike McDaniel rehabilitated your career. You're doing great things. We're ready for this season. And it's like, now I got to hear about like how you and, Brian Flores didn't like each other like 4 years ago. I don't care. And frankly, nor should you. You should be so fucking excited that you don't have Brian Flores anymore and you have a guy that actually believes in you. And again, he didn't say anything, crazy, but it's just a sheer fact of the matter that we have to like kind of drum up this stuff. And it's almost like the media knows the Dolphins are going to like talk about it because they're so like enthralled in this like, oh, nobody believes in us and we're so disrespected. You should be disrespected. You haven't won shit in 24 years. When you actually win something, call me. I get it. You won 11 games. Yippee. You had a 3-game lead with 5 games to go to win a division, and you fucking blew it at home because you didn't make enough plays, Tua, and your special teams was dog shit. Okay? So I don't want to hear any more you crying about how, oh, my coach was hard on me. Well, guess what? Here's my worry, okay? And I'm not going to sit here and shit on the way that Mike McDaniel runs stuff because there's positivity. They love him. They play for him. Great. Here's where I'm going to shit on it. My problem is when times get tough, are you going to be the one, Mike McDaniel and Tua and everybody else, to sit there and say, all right, times are tough. Are we going to buckle down and make tough decisions? And is Tua going to get in somebody's ass when they make a mistake? Is Mike McDaniel going to get in Tua's ass when he makes a mistake? Or is this going to be, oh, we got to coddle him? Because there's so much coddling going on for a team that's good, not great, but I feel like a lot of times act like they're great. And it ain't going to fly with me. I'm sorry. I've seen it all. I've watched it all. I've been through too much watching this team over the years. So hate to go off on a rant here because I do think we're going to have a good positive season. However, we got to stop with this. All this media, they get goaded into this media bullshit. And I feel like it just like it invades them. And it affects them. Like, we got to block out the noise and go to work and actually change the narrative. Guess why people are questioning you? Because that's the narrative that you've created by playing like shit against playoff teams for the last 2 years and by blowing games down the stretch to lose a division and by losing playoff games. And let's go another step. You can make an argument with the way they're practicing and the way that they manage things, that could be leading to injuries because you got guys who are just not ready to get hit. Now, football's different. It's not what it was in the 80s and 90s. The way practices work, there's no more two-a-days. It's very controlled, and there's a balance, but I need to see toughness. If you do not give me toughness at the beginning of this year coming out the box, you're in trouble because that schedule is going to be unrelenting as the year goes on. So, hate to go on that rant, but that was a big story this week with Tua talking about Brian Flores. let's get excited. Let's be positive. Let me flip the script here. We're 2 weeks away from the regular season opener, Hard Rock Stadium, Dolphins, Jaguars, and then bang, about 4 days later, Dolphins, Bills on a Thursday night. It's put up or shut up time. It is time. You got to start this year off right. We need a good 2-0 and get the hell out of Miami, head out to Seattle week 3, and set yourself up for a good season. So it'll be very interesting as we go through the cuts this week, getting to the 53, getting everybody healthy, getting everybody ready, rested up, and then boom, 2 weeks, ready to roll for the home opener. So this has been the Dolphins Make Me Cry podcast. I appreciate you tuning in. Like, hit, subscribe, smash that button to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you next week.